Let's be honest for a second. Most competitive campaigns start with this thought: what are our competitors doing and how can we do it better? And that thought alone just about guarantees you're going to be the one who gets left behind, because competitive campaigns are not about watching competitors. They're about understanding why buyers choose one company over another, including yours. So today I'm going to teach you a framework, and it's not about reacting to competitors. It is a process that is going to help you uncover true buyer decision criteria. It's going to help you build claims with real proof points, and it's going to help you enable sales to use those claims when they're in the field, not to mention using them in your own marketing campaigns. So I'm excited about this. There's a ton to dig into. Let's get going. This is Spark Sessions. We're the podcast that helps strategic marketers stop reacting and start leading. I am your host, Lori Tyler. And after more than 25 years in B2B marketing, I have seen way too many companies treat competitive campaigns like another box to check instead of using it like a strategic tool in their toolkit. So today we're changing all that. And the topic for this podcast, I was thinking about it because I was actually thinking about a conversation once that I had with a sales leader, although I can't say this happened just one time. And I'm sure it's happened more than once to you. But in this particular conversation, I had a sales leader come to me and he said they were losing deals because competitors were just better. And he said, just tell marketing to build me something that I can use. Like, okay, let me get on that. So what I asked him was, well, how do buyers describe those decisions? And he looked at me kind of puzzled, like, why are you asking me that? But, it's really because everyone has an opinion about why deals are won or why they are lost. But opinions are not data. And it's funny because, you know, most organizations talk about buyers all day long, but very few actually talk to buyers after the deal is over. We end up relying on the notes that are in the CRM, if there's any notes in the CRM. We rely on internal opinions. We rely on things that we assume to be true. And assumptions in those conversations might feel productive, but they're not true insights. So when I ask, how do buyers describe those decisions? What I'm really asking, what I'm really trying to get at is, do we have direct, firsthand language from people who actually chose us and from the people who didn't choose us? Like, do we know in their words what tipped the scale for them? What almost stopped them? What mattered more than maybe that they were expecting? What turned them off? Because until you have that, any competitive campaign that you build is based on interpretation, not reality. And that is the moment where most competitive strategies are just quietly breaking. What you really need is direct feedback from the people who made the decisions, the buyers themselves. This is where win-loss interviews become your strategic superpower. And, a lot of companies, maybe most companies, are either getting them wrong or they're kind of doing them half-baked or they're not doing them at all. And then they wonder why nothing changes. So today we're going to get it right. And we are going to build a competitive campaign that actually works because it's going to be supported by real buyer insight, not guesswork. So the first step is understanding where you actually win and lose. And we're going to start with sales results, not sales opinions, but the results. And let me be really clear here too, because this is not at all a knock on sales. Sales teams are on the front lines every single day. They're working incredibly hard. They hear objections every single day that they have to combat, but they don't always hear the whole truth because, buyers, they don't always give them the whole truth. Sometimes when a buyer says, we went with a competitor because of price, maybe what they really mean is, I don't feel confident that your product was going to solve our problem. Because when you think about the buying life cycle in B2B, it's long and it's complicated and it's complex. It takes a lot of time. And so during that whole process, the buyer and the buying team are forming a relationship with that rep. And so, a lot of times they are just trying to be polite. If it's a loss situation, they're trying to let the rep down easy. They're not going to say, your messaging confused me, or I don't trust your implementation story, or like, I just can't picture my team actually using this. So sales walks away with that surface level reason because that's all that they were given. That's what they were told. That's all that they know, but it's not the root cause. So that's why you start with outcomes. Where did we win? Where did we lose? Against whom? In what segment? What was the deal size? Like those are the facts that you can actually get to. And then you can use conversations, which are going to be your win-loss interviews, to uncover the true why behind those facts. Because competitive campaigns that end up being built on just those surface level explanations usually end up solving the wrong problem. And solving the wrong problem, no matter how well you even execute the campaign, still leads to losing deals. And this is why strategic marketers do not argue with sales opinions. Respect them. Do respect them, do listen to them, but you also need to validate them with the buyer truth, the truths that sales just can't get to because they're not given to them. So look at your win rate. Identify the top competitors that you lose to the most. Segment by deal size, by product line, and then start to layer in the insights that most teams miss because CRM data and sales rep notes are only going to tell you part of the story. So use internal sources to start to build an educated guess, but know that those are not conclusions. Okay, in step 2, this is where you're going to conduct your win-loss interviews. And a lot of times where I see organizations trip up is, no one has time and they probably see the value of doing these, but who has time for this? So they end up conducting a survey or trying to add another field in the CRM for the sales rep to fill out. But you're not going to get anything valuable out of that because a great win-loss interview is a conversation. It is not a survey. And it really needs to be done very soon after the decision because you want to have the conversation while all the memories are still fresh. So I would say, you want to try and meet with the buyers within a month of the close of the deal. You want to use open-ended questions. You want to use probing questions. You don't want to give them an opportunity to just give you a yes/no response. And ultimately, you're going to be walking them through their entire, buying life cycle from the start of the problem through to the decision that they made. And you really want to get their approval up front to record the session because you want to transcribe it later. You want to go through that and review it because capturing their exact language and their quotes is going to be super critical later. We'll talk about that more. So for the outreach, get an introduction, have your list ready, send an email, and, say something like, "Hi, I'm so and so. I'm reaching out as part of a short research project to understand how teams like yours evaluate and choose solutions." And I always like to add something like, just say it very directly. This isn't a sales call. It is purely for research. Would you be open to a 20-minute conversation? And that's important because buyers, are going to give you, well, first, they're going to agree to it a lot easier, and they're going to give you far richer insights when they understand that you're not there to pitch them something. You're not there trying to change their mind, that you're simply doing research and that you're coming at this completely neutral. And then once you get on the call with them, you want to just structure it broadly, but have them, have them walk through the process. So, start very early on. Say, can you walk me through how you first realized that you had a problem to solve? And then you can follow up with, how did you go about evaluating solutions to solve that problem? You're really wanting to try and explore all of the decision making criteria now that goes into that. So ask, well, what mattered the most in your evaluation and why? You want to ask what other vendors they were considering, what stood out about these other vendors, and ask them, where did they look for the information? Where did they look for more information when they were trying to learn about the vendors who made their short list? Like, that's going to be really helpful for your marketing tactics later. And the goal and kind of the trick, I guess, to these conversations is the probing behind the questions. And you can use techniques like the 5 whys, but, just keep asking why that mattered and try to uncover the root motivations and not leave it at just surface level answers. I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised at how much your buyers are going to end up opening up in these conversations. So I always start with scheduling and just promising to only take 20 minutes of their time. And if they're chatty and if you see that you're going to start to go over the time, be sure and pause and ask if they have a few more minutes. I have never had someone say no. So, take the time, take the opportunity, but just make sure that as you're finishing, as you're wrapping up, ask the critical question, which is, what would have made the difference in your decision? What, if anything, would have made a difference in your decision? And you're going to end up with a full picture of the buying process from how they first identified the problem, how they came up with their short list, how they, evaluated those vendors, how the perceptions that they had kind of molded and shaped their opinions, and what if anything could have made a difference. And importantly, you're doing this with both wins and losses. You really want to try and maintain that 1-to-1 ratio because that really preserves balance and that prevents you ending up with, a bunch of skewed results. So, step 3, you want to translate the themes that came out of your interviews into positioning insights. So now what you have is the raw buyer language, and this is gold. But the raw interviews are only useful if you can now take them and really synthesize them down into some clear insights. So you want to start to group some of the quotes, some of the themes by things like, um, the primary buying criteria, the competitive comparisons, the messaging resonance, and definitely, make note of any misunderstandings or points of confusion. And those are so important. And remember, when you hear those on a call, do not jump in. Do not try to clarify. You don't want to explain anything. Do not defend anything. Definitely do not correct them. Even if you know that they're wrong, even if you're thinking, gosh, that's not even how our product actually works. Like they don't even know what they're talking about. Because the moment that you try and clarify, the moment that you jump in and stop them, you're erasing the signal. And their confusion is the data. Their confusion tells you so much. It's going to tell you that, or where your messaging isn't landing, or where your story isn't clear, or that your value just isn't translating. And it doesn't matter what you meant, it only matters what they heard. So instead of correcting, really lean into it and say, tell me more about that. Or can you walk me through what you thought we did? Or, what gave you that impression? Your job in that moment is not to fix the misunderstanding. Your job is to just understand where it came from. Did it come from the website? Did it come from a demo they were given, a pitch deck? Is it something that maybe they heard from a competitor? Because wherever that confusion originated, that's where your competitive campaign has work to do. Those moments are gifts. Be grateful for those moments. They're going to show you exactly where deals quietly go off the rails. And when you collect those patterns across interviews, you end up not just improving messaging, you're going to prevent future losses. Okay. And then, back to the process of kind of synthesizing what you heard. So make sure that you're considering what are the real decision drivers. So these are the factors that really cause buyers to either choose us or to walk away. And highlight the language that you hear over and over again that's, repeatedly used by buyers. Those are the phrases that your market actually thinks, not how internal teams wish they thought. And using those and parroting those is going to make your positioning that much more credible. Now, step four, we are going to connect competitive narratives to the buying drivers. So you've already mapped your competitive positioning and your buyer priorities. And now we're going to connect the dots. So now you ask, what competitor story actually matches what buyers actually care about? And what competitor story is missing what the real drivers are? So, for example, if one of your competitors says, feature depth matters the most, but then in the buyer interviews, you might have heard that, well, really understanding the business problems mattered more. That's a positioning gap that you can now exploit. And that doesn't just give you a competitive claim, but it gives you a buyer validated competitive claim. And that becomes really powerful. Step 5 is building claims now with actual proof, because claims in a competitive campaign have to be backed by evidence. So you want to convert your interview data into proof points. And that can look like any number of things. It could look like a percent claim. It could look like the percent of buyers who said ease of use, for example, mattered the most. You can take a customer quote, make sure you get permission, but take a customer quote and use that in your marketing, because obviously a direct quote from an actual user is going to speak even more strongly than marketing language. You can even use or create claims like time to value numbers, if something like implementation speed was a theme. Because when you take all of this, and you're kind of taking it, I mean, I guess I'll say you're taking it outside of marketing fluff. Okay. I'm saying that with love because it's taking you into data-based claims that you can use and that your sales team can now use and that you can all really defend. Okay, step 6. You want to enable sales and you want to give them really practical tools. And this is where a lot of times these competitive campaigns do fail. Marketing builds something, sales never uses it. So we want to build tools that are actually tailored to the sales workflow. You want to build competitive battle cards with decision drivers and actual buyer language. You can create objection response scripts that are tied to some of the real buyer themes. You can create decision criteria summary that buyers actually use and create these and then actually train the sales team live, like walk through the scenarios and let sales practice with some real examples. Like that's how the language actually sticks. It's not enough to just hand out a deck, throw out the materials and walk away. An effective win-loss and competitive campaign, it's going to have that enabling component and you're going to have the tracking component. So you also want to be tracking how often sales is actually using these tools and whether win rates actually improve in competitive situations and whether the objections kind of change over time. That's how you know that it's actually working. Okay, step 7, and this should kind of go without saying, but you want to collaborate cross functionally. Competitive campaigns are not and cannot be a marketing island. They have to be coordinated efforts. And if you're in a larger organization, you can partner with stakeholders like product marketing. And if you're lucky enough to have a competitive intelligence team and sales enablement leaders and sales operations. If you're in a smaller organization or, kind of a scrappy organization, you can still form a really powerful working group with, take your top sales star, who's most knowledgeable about the deals. Take a product leader who has roadmap insights. Take a customer success contributor, and form a group and try to have either monthly or maybe quarterly meetings and just make sure that you're all aligned because what you want to do is try to form this into a task group because together you want to start to refine what are the win-loss interview themes. And, you want to validate some of the competitive narratives. And together, you want to help shape the messaging and the sales enablement. And together, you want to track the impact. So, even if you don't have a competitive intel department, it doesn't mean that you can't build a competitive advantage. You just need collaboration, over the chaos. So let's think now about how to apply all of this. How does this actually change your work? When you incorporate really structured win loss insights, like we've talked about, into your competitive campaigns, your positioning now is going to be rooted in the buyer reality and not the internal assumptions. Your messaging is now going to reflect what buyers actually care about, not what you or anybody else thinks that they should care about. Sales is now going to have this new vocabulary that's tied to real decision drivers. And your marketing campaigns are going to hit on real pain points. And product is going to get signals about gaps in capabilities, that could make a real difference in decision making. That's could ultimately impact the roadmap. And that is how competitive campaigns, really stop being surface level and how they start moving revenue and how competitors become context for you and not distractions. And your differentiation becomes clear because now it's been validated by the buyers themselves. And over time, now you're really building this repeatable win-loss program. So this week, I want you to start simple and work with your sales team. Let them know that you're starting this win-loss program, and together identify 5 closed won deals and 5 closed lost deals. And work with the team to identify who the decision makers were and send your email. Invite them for that 20-minute conversation. Use the questions that we talked about, and just follow the buying process and really listen without correcting and capture their language. And then once you get a few of these under your belt, start to look for patterns. That becomes your foundation. And then from there, everything else that you build, your messaging, your campaigns, your sales enablement, all of that is going to be grounded in the buyer's reality. So here's the big takeaway from today. Competitive campaigns don't win. You're not going to win by imitating customers. You're going to win by understanding the buyers. And if you understand your buyers more than your competitors do, you're going to win more often. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you got anything out of this session, please consider giving it a review. I invite you to subscribe to my channel, and I hope to see you next time. In the meantime, I'm Lori Tyler, and this has been Spark Sessions.